The garage reeked of motor oil and desperation. 23 mechanics had tried, 23 had failed. The 1947 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead sat like a metal gravestone in the center of Big Eddie's shop, its engine silent for 3 months. The Hells Angels chapter president paced like a caged animal. This wasn't just any bike. It belonged to their founder, and without it running, their annual memorial ride couldn't happen. Then Frank wheeled himself through the door. 78 years old, confined to a wheelchair for 15 years, wearing a faded cardigan that had seen better decades. The bikers snickered. Big Eddie started to protest. But when Frank's weathered hands touched that engine, something magical happened. His fingers moved with surgical precision, finding problems that had eluded every expert. Within minutes, the knucklehead roared to life for the first time in months. The bikers erupted in celebration until they saw Frank's face. Pure terror had replaced the joy, because fixing that bike had just revealed who he really was, and some secrets from the Cold War were never meant to surface. What did Frank's expertise accidentally expose about his mysterious past? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The celebration died as Frank gripped his wheelchair armrests, knuckles white as bone. His watery blue eyes darted toward the exit, calculating distance like a soldier planning retreat. The knucklehead's purr filled the sudden silence, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to mock his growing panic. "Jesus Christ," whispered Tank, the chapter president, his massive frame blocking Frank's path to the door. "How'd you do that?" Frank's mouth opened, then closed. His hands trembled, not from age but from something deeper, something that had been dormant for decades until those familiar engine vibrations awakened memories he'd buried in vodka and prescription pills. "Lucky guess," Frank croaked, but his voice betrayed him. The careful Boston accent he'd cultivated for 40 years cracked, revealing traces of something else, something Eastern European. Big Eddie wiped his hands on a greasy rag, studying Frank with new interest. "That wasn't luck, old man. You rebuilt that carburetor like you'd done it 1,000 times. But that's Soviet-era engineering hidden in there, military grade." The color drained from Frank's face. He'd forgotten about the modifications, the ones he'd installed himself in 1963 when the bike had served a very different purpose than weekend rides, back when it carried microfilm instead of passengers, when its engine noise masked the sound of dead drops in dark alleys. "I don't know what you're talking about," Frank said, but his wheelchair jerked backward, hitting the workbench. Tools clattered to the concrete floor like scattered bullets. Tank crouched down, bringing his scarred face level with Frank's. His leather vest creaked as he leaned closer. "See, here's the thing, Gramps. That bike's been in our clubhouse for 20 years, came to us from a dead member's estate. But looking at your handiwork, I'm thinking maybe it found its way back to its real owner." Frank's breathing turned shallow. The garage suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in like an interrogation room in Prague, or Berlin, or any of a dozen cities where he'd played the great game of shadows and lies. "You're mistaken," he whispered, but even he didn't believe it anymore. One of the younger bikers, a wiry kid with prison tattoos crawling up his neck, pulled out his phone. "I'm gonna snap some pics of what you did here. My uncle works for the feds, says they got databases of old spooks from back in the day." Frank's survival instincts, dormant for so long, suddenly roared back to life. His right hand moved toward the concealed pocket in his wheelchair, muscle memory from decades of carrying backup weapons. But Tank caught the motion. "Easy there, killer." Tank's voice carried a new edge. "Nobody's calling anybody yet, but you and me need to have a conversation." The knucklehead's engine ticked as it cooled, each sound like a countdown timer. Frank closed his eyes, remembering the last time he'd heard that particular rhythm. Budapest, 1968, the night everything went wrong, the night he'd stolen this very motorcycle from a KGB safehouse and rode it across 3 borders with half the Soviet intelligence apparatus hunting him. He'd thought he'd escaped his past when he'd faked the accident 15 years ago. The wheelchair wasn't just for show, the bullets really had shattered his spine. But some skills never fade, and when his hands touched that familiar engine, 40 years of careful anonymity crumbled in minutes. When Frank opened his eyes, Tank was smiling. It wasn't a friendly expression. "Here's what's going to happen, old man. You're going to tell us exactly who you are and why this bike means so much to you, because I got a feeling fixing our founder's ride is going to be the least of your problems." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Or maybe it was the sound of his past finally catching up. The chrome gleamed like liquid mercury under the harsh fluorescent lights of Jimmy's garage. But Tank Morrison wasn't admiring the beauty of his 1947 knucklehead. He was staring at the third mechanic in 2 days who'd just thrown his hands up in defeat. "I'm telling you, Tank, this thing's possessed," said Eddie Ramirez, wiping grease from his fingers with a rag that had seen better decades. "The engine's perfect, transmission's solid, electrical's clean as a whistle, but she won't turn over. Won't even try." Tank's massive frame cast a shadow over the bike as he circled it slowly. The Harley-Davidson had been his father's and his grandfather's before that. 3 generations of Morrison blood had ridden this machine through wars, riots, and cross-country runs that had become club legend. Now it sat silent as a tombstone. "There's got to be something," Tank growled, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with being president of the Iron Wolves Charter. "Bikes don't just die for no reason." Eddie shrugged. "Maybe it's time, brother. Even legends got to rest sometime." The suggestion earned him a look that could melt steel. Tank Morrison didn't accept defeat, especially not from a machine. The knucklehead wasn't just transportation. It was history, legacy, power. When he rolled up to a meeting on that bike, every angel from here to Sacramento knew who was coming. "Pack it up," Tank said finally. "We're taking it to Rossetti's." 2 hours later, they were loading the Harley off a trailer in front of a squat brick building that looked more like a forgotten warehouse than a motorcycle shop. The sign hanging crooked above the door read Rossetti's Custom Cycles in faded paint, and weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot concrete. Tank had heard whispers about this place. They said Marco Rossetti could work miracles on bikes that other mechanics had written off as scrap. They also said he was particular about his customers and that angels weren't always welcome. But Tank was running out of options. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Tank found himself in a surprisingly organized shop. Vintage motorcycles in various stages of restoration lined the walls, and the air smelled of oil, metal polish, and something else, something that reminded him of his grandfather's war stories. "Help you, gentlemen?" Tank turned toward the voice and stopped short. Behind the counter sat an old man in a wheelchair, probably 70, with steel-grey hair and hands that looked like they'd been shaped by decades of hard work. But it was his eyes that caught Tank's attention, pale blue and sharp as razor wire, the kind of eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. "You, Rossetti?" "I am." "And you're Tank Morrison?" It wasn't a question. "Heard you might be coming by. Word travels fast when a knucklehead goes silent." Tank studied the old man carefully. There was something about Marco Rossetti that didn't fit. The way he sat too straight in that wheelchair, the way his gaze never wavered, the military precision with which tools were arranged on the workbench behind him. This wasn't just some grease monkey who'd gotten lucky with a few difficult repairs. "Can you fix it?" "Depends. Can you afford my price?" "Money's no object." Marco's smile was thin as paper. "Didn't say anything about money, son." Before Tank could ask what that meant, 2 more bikers pushed through the door, Diesel and Chrome, his lieutenant and road captain. Both men moved with the casual menace that came from years of violence, but they stopped when they saw Marco, something like recognition flickering in their eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," Chrome whispered. Marco's expression didn't change, but Tank caught the slight tensing of his shoulders. "Gentlemen, you know each other?" Tank asked. Chrome nodded slowly, not personally, but "I know the face." My old man had a picture on his dresser. Korean War, 1st Marine Division, always talked about this engineer who could fix anything, build anything, blow up anything. He paused, studying Marco with new respect, called him the wizard. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marco's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair, and for a moment, Tank thought he saw something dangerous flash in those pale eyes, something that explained why 3 hardened bikers suddenly felt like they were in the presence of a predator instead of a disabled old man. "Your father was a good Marine," Marco said quietly, "but that was a long time ago." Tank stepped forward. "So, can you fix my bike or not?" Marco was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving between the 3 men and then toward the door where the knucklehead waited on its trailer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Tank think of his grandfather's warnings about sleeping dogs. "Bring her in. But understand something first. Once I start working on that machine, there's no going back. Some doors are better left closed." The Harley's engine block sat dismantled across 3 workbenches like the organs of some mechanical beast. Marcus wheeled himself between the pieces, his weathered hands tracing serial numbers that had been filed down decades ago. Each component told a story, modifications that shouldn't exist, tolerances machined to impossible specifications, alloys that belonged in aerospace applications, not motorcycle engines. "This isn't just any bike," he murmured, lifting a cylinder head that weighed twice what it should. The metal felt warm despite sitting cold all night, and when he held it up to the fluorescent light, he could see the telltale shimmer of titanium steel composite, military grade, the kind of material that required security clearance just to purchase. Thunder stepped closer, his massive frame casting shadows across the workbench. "You saying someone's been lying to us about what this thing is?" Marcus set down the cylinder head with reverence. His mind raced back 40 years to a classified project in a bunker beneath the Nevada desert. Project Midnight Runner, bikes built for operations that officially never happened, engineered by men whose names were scrubbed from every record. "The frame's been modified," Marcus said, pointing to stress marks along the backbone. "See these weld patterns? They're not factory. Someone reinforced this for weight, serious weight. And look here." He indicated a series of small holes drilled with surgical precision along the fuel tank mounting points, attachment points for equipment, the kind you don't buy at your local motorcycle shop. Jake leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Equipment like what?" Marcus hesitated. The truth sat on his tongue like poison. Communications arrays, weapons mounts, sometimes worse things. But admitting he recognized the modifications meant admitting who he used to be. And Marcus Holloway was supposed to be dead. "Could be anything," he said finally. "The point is, whoever built this knew what they were doing. These tolerances, this metallurgy, we're talking about engineers with unlimited budgets and flexible morality." Thunder's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face darkened. "We got company coming. Big Jim's rolling in with half the chapter. Word's out that we found someone who can work on the bike." The garage suddenly felt smaller. Marcus wheeled himself to the window and peered through the blinds. 3 more Harleys were pulling into the lot, their riders wearing the death's head patch of the Hells Angels. Behind them, a black sedan that didn't belong. "That's not all Angels," Marcus observed. "No shit." Thunder was already moving toward a tool cabinet, his hand reaching for something hidden behind a rack of wrenches. "Jake, kill the lights in the back, now." The fluorescents flickered off, plunging the rear of the garage into shadows. Marcus felt the familiar tingle of adrenaline, muscle memory from operations he'd spent 4 decades trying to forget. His hands moved automatically to his wheelchair's frame, fingers finding the hidden releases he'd installed years ago, old habits. The front door chimed as Big Jim entered, his Lieutenant Razor flanking him. Behind them came 2 men in expensive suits who moved like predators, too smooth, too aware of their surroundings. Federal agents, Marcus realized. Or something worse. Thunder. Big Jim's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Heard you got yourself a miracle worker. Someone who can bring our baby back to life. Still working on it, Thunder replied, positioning himself between the visitors and the dismantled engine. Might take a while longer. One of the suits stepped forward, his eyes scanning the garage with professional thoroughness. When his gaze fell on Marcus, something flickered across his features. Recognition? Suspicion? Mind if we take a look at what you found? The man's voice was cultured, educated. Not the usual government muscle. I have some experience with vintage motorcycles. Marcus forced himself to remain still, to project the helpless demeanor of a disabled old man puttering with machines he barely understood. But inside, every instinct screamed danger. These weren't motorcycle enthusiasts, or even regular feds. The way they moved, the way they watched. This was a hunting party. Not much to see yet, Marcus said, his voice deliberately shaky with age. Just a lot of broken parts and wishful thinking. The suit approached the workbench, his eyes cataloguing every component with military precision. When he reached for the cylinder head Marcus had been examining, Thunder's hand shot out to stop him. Careful there, friend. Some of those pieces are fragile. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Big Jim's hand drifted toward his jacket, while Razor shifted to flank the second suit. Only Marcus remained motionless, but his fingers were already releasing the first of his wheelchair's hidden mechanisms. The suit smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Of course, we wouldn't want to damage anything irreplaceable. The word hung in the air like a threat. Marcus realized with crystalline clarity that his past hadn't just caught up with him, it had been hunting him all along, and now everyone in this garage was standing in the crossfire of a war that began before any of them were born. The Harley's engine compartment looked like a metallic puzzle box that had been shaken by an earthquake. Marcus traced his weathered fingers along the custom modifications, each touch revealing layers of engineering that shouldn't exist on a motorcycle from 1967. The frame had been reinforced with titanium threading, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The electrical system ran through military-grade wiring that could withstand an electromagnetic pulse. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his breath fogging in the cold garage air. "What did you do to this thing, Tommy?" Jake shifted impatiently behind him, leather jacket creaking. "You find something or what, old man? We've been here 2 hours." Marcus ignored him, focusing on a serial number etched into the engine block. His blood turned to ice water. The digits were burned into his memory like a brand, part of a sequence he'd helped design 30 years ago when the world was different and he'd been a different man entirely. "Where exactly did your chapter acquire this motorcycle?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It belonged to Tommy the Tank Morrison. Bought it off some collector in Nevada before he died." Jake's tone carried the reverence reserved for fallen brothers. "Thing's been our good luck charm for 15 years. We need it running for the rally next week." Marcus had heard of Morrison. Every rider on the West Coast had. The man was legend until someone put 3 bullets in his chest outside a Reno casino. What the newspapers hadn't mentioned was Morrison's connection to a certain classified government program that officially never existed. The modifications made sense now. This wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a prototype. Marcus wheeled himself to his tool cabinet, buying time to think. Inside the third drawer, beneath layers of shop rags, his fingers found the encrypted satellite phone he'd hoped never to use again. The device felt alien in his hands after so many years of silence. "I need to order a specialized part," he announced, holding up the phone. "This is going to take longer than I thought." Jake's expression darkened. "How much longer?" "Few days, maybe a week." "These components aren't exactly available at the local auto parts store. We don't have a week. The demons are riding through our territory next Friday and we need every advantage we can get." Marcus felt the familiar weight of old choices pressing down on him. The Iron Demons weren't just another motorcycle club. They were connected to people who would kill for what was hidden inside this engine. People who thought Marcus Wheeler was dead and buried in an unmarked grave outside Kabul. "Then you'll have to ride without it," Marcus said, knowing the words would ignite Jake's temper. The younger man's hand moved to his belt, where Marcus glimpsed the handle of a knife. "That's not how this works, Grandpa. You fix our bike or what?" The voice belonged to Sarah, who appeared in the garage doorway carrying a shotgun with the casual confidence of someone who knew how to use it. "You threatening my father, Jake?" The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Marcus watched Jake weigh his options, calculating whether 2 damaged civilians were worth the risk. Finally, the biker stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "No threat, Sarah, just business." His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "But understand, this bike means everything to us. We'd do anything to get it back on the road." After Jake left with promises to return tomorrow, Sarah locked the garage door and turned to her father. "What aren't you telling me?" Marcus stared at the Harley, its chrome gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a sleeping predator. He could dismantle the modifications, claim the parts were beyond repair, but Jake wasn't the type to accept failure gracefully, and the iron demons were already circling like vultures. "Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried," he said finally. "Dad, you're scaring me. What's really going on?" Marcus activated the satellite phone. The device chirped once, then displayed a single message, "Signal acquired." Somewhere in Virginia, computers were registering his location for the first time in 15 years. Within hours, people would know that Marcus Wheeler wasn't dead. "Pack a bag," he told Sarah. "Just essentials. We might need to leave quickly." "Leave? This is our home. This is your business. This is survival." Marcus began transferring files from his computer to an encrypted drive. "That motorcycle isn't just a bike, it's a weapon. And there are people who've been looking for it for a very long time." Outside, a car engine turned over in the distance, too smooth, too quiet for the neighborhood. Marcus wheeled to the window and peered through the blinds. A black sedan sat parked across the street, its occupants invisible behind tinted glass. They'd found him faster than expected. Sarah followed his gaze and swore softly. "How long do we have?" "Not long enough." Marcus returned to the Harley, his hands already reaching for his tools, but maybe long enough to finish this properly. The garage fell silent except for the steady tick of cooling metal. Marcus watched the old man's weathered hands move across the panhead's engine with the precision of a surgeon, but Henry's eyes held something far more dangerous than medical knowledge. Those fingers traced components with an intimacy that spoke of decades spent with machines designed for more than transportation. "You built weapons," Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. Henry's hands stilled. "I built what I was told to build." His voice carried the weight of old regrets, engines for boats that carried things they shouldn't have carried, motorcycles that could outrun anything law enforcement had, devices that made people disappear without a trace. The admission hung between them like smoke from a cold fire. Marcus felt his world shift slightly, the comfortable boundaries of his small-town existence suddenly permeable. He'd always suspected Henry was more than he appeared, but this revelation opened doors he wasn't sure he wanted to walk through. "The Russians you mentioned weren't the only ones." Henry's laugh was bitter. "I was young, brilliant, and stupid enough to think engineering was pure, that machines were neutral. It took me too long to understand that everything I built became a tool for someone else's violence." Outside, the rumble of approaching motorcycles made them both freeze. Not the single bike of a casual rider, but the coordinated thunder of a pack moving with purpose. Henry's face went pale beneath his whiskers. "They found me," he whispered. Marcus moved to the window, peering through grimy glass. 5 bikes rolled into the lot, their riders dressed in leather and chrome. But these weren't Hell's Angels. The patches on their backs bore different colors, different symbols. The lead rider removed his helmet, revealing a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and cold calculation. "Back door," Marcus said, but Henry shook his head. "No point in running. Viktor Kozlov doesn't give up once he's found his prey." The name sent ice through Marcus's veins. Even in their small town, certain names carried weight. Kozlov was one of them, a man whose business interests stretched from legitimate shipping companies to decidedly less legal enterprises, the kind of man who collected debts in blood when currency proved insufficient. The garage door's pneumatic hiss announced their visitors before the first boot crossed the threshold. Kozlov entered like he owned the space, his pale eyes scanning the cluttered workshop before settling on Henry with predatory satisfaction. "Dmitry Volkov," he said in accented English, "though I hear you call yourself Henry now." Henry straightened in his wheelchair, and Marcus saw something he'd never witnessed before, the old man's fear transforming into something harder, more dangerous. "Victor, you look older." Prison ages a man. 23 years gives one time to think, time to plan. Kozlov's smile held no warmth. Time to remember old friends who disappeared when the authorities came calling. "I kept my mouth shut. But you ran." Kozlov stepped closer, his men fanning out to block any escape routes. "You took my money, built my machines, and when things became complicated, you vanished like morning mist." Marcus's hand drifted toward the wrench on his workbench, but Henry caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "These weren't men you fought with tools. These were predators who understood only power and fear. I fulfilled every contract," Henry said carefully. "What happened afterward wasn't my responsibility." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, old friend." Kozlov crouched beside the wheelchair, bringing himself to Henry's eye level. "The submarine you modified for me? The one with the special compartments and the silent running modifications? It was found last month off the coast of Maine, still carrying cargo from 30 years ago." Henry's face went ashen. "That's impossible. The modifications I made were temporary. The hull integrity wouldn't have lasted." "Your engineering was better than you thought, better than anyone thought." Kozlov's voice carried a dangerous satisfaction, which creates problems for both of us. "The cargo manifest mentions your work specifically, your real name. Your fingerprints are still on components that federal investigators are very interested in." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Whatever Henry had built, whatever he'd helped transport, it was still out there, still dangerous, still capable of destroying lives. "What do you want?" Henry asked. "The same thing you want, Dmitri, for this problem to disappear permanently." Kozlov stood, brushing dust from his leather jacket. "You're going to help me retrieve what's left of that cargo, clean up the evidence, make it so neither of us has to worry about midnight visits from federal agents. And if I refuse..." Kozlov's gaze shifted to Marcus, lingering with obvious intent. "I think you're too smart to refuse. Besides, you always did your best work under pressure." The Russian turned toward the door, his men following like shadows. At the threshold, he paused. "You have 48 hours to decide how cooperative you want to be. Don't make me come back here asking twice." The garage fell silent except for the steady tick of cooling metal. Marcus wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag, his weathered fingers trembling slightly as he stepped back from the Harley. The engine modifications were complete, but the weight of what he'd just unleashed pressed down on him like a physical force. Jake stood transfixed, running his hands along the chrome pipes that now housed something far more dangerous than exhaust. "Jesus, Marcus, what exactly did you build into my bike?" "Something that died with the Cold War," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or should have." The old man moved to his workbench and pulled out a small metal device, no bigger than a garage door opener. His thumb hovered over a single red button. "This is the only activation key. Without it, your bike runs like any other Harley. With it..." He paused, meeting Jake's eyes. "Let's hope we never find out." Tommy had been unusually quiet throughout the modifications, but now he stepped forward, his face pale. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." Marcus nodded slowly. "The name Viktor Kozlov. Does it mean anything to you?" The activation device slipped from Marcus's fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. The color drained from his face as if someone had opened a valve. "Where did you hear that name?" His voice was barely recognizable. "My dad," Tommy said quietly. "Before he died, he used to have nightmares. He'd wake up screaming about someone named Victor Kozlov. Said the man was a ghost who built machines that could level city blocks." Marcus gripped the edge of his workbench, his knuckles white. "Your father, what was his name?" "Thomas McKenna, Master Sergeant, Army Corps of Engineers. He served in Berlin in the 70s. The old man's legs gave out and he sank heavily into his wheelchair. For a long moment he stared at Tommy as if seeing him for the first time. "Tommy McKenna," he whispered. "Dear God, you're Tommy's boy." Jake looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "What the hell is going on here?" Marcus's eyes never left Tommy's face. "Your father saved my life in Berlin, and I destroyed his." The garage door's automatic sensor chimed, and Sarah rushed in, her face flushed with urgency. "We've got problems, big ones." She stopped short when she saw the tension in the room. "What did I miss?" "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. "How long have you been tracking the activity around Jake's bike?" "Since day one." "Why?" "Show her," Marcus said to Tommy. Tommy pulled out his phone and showed Sarah the photograph he'd taken earlier. 3 men in dark suits standing across from the garage, their attention clearly focused on the building. Sarah's expression darkened. "These aren't random surveillance. This is military grade." She looked at Marcus with new understanding. "They're not here for the bike, are they? They're here for you." Marcus wheeled himself to a locked cabinet in the corner of the garage. With shaking hands, he entered a combination and pulled out a manila folder, yellowed with age. 30 years ago, I was Victor Kozlov. I was a Soviet engineer who specialized in portable strategic devices. When the Berlin Wall fell, I was extracted by American intelligence in exchange for my research." He opened the folder, revealing technical drawings that made Sarah's breath catch. "The Prometheus Protocol. I designed compact fusion devices that could be deployed from seemingly innocent platforms, motorcycles, cars, even bicycles." Jake backed away from his bike. "Are you telling me my Harley is now a nuclear weapon?" "Not nuclear," Marcus corrected. "Something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous in the wrong hands." He gestured to the technical drawings. "Your father, Tommy, was part of the team that helped me disappear, but when certain elements within the intelligence community tried to force me to continue my work for them, he helped me escape again. They destroyed his career for it, branded him as a security risk." Tommy's hands clenched into fists. "That's why he could never get work after the army, why he drank himself to death." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and the pain in his voice was unmistakable. "I've carried that guilt for 20 years. Sarah moved to the window and peered through the blinds. "Guilt's going to have to wait. We've got company." 2 black SUVs had pulled up across the street. Men in tactical gear were positioning themselves at strategic points around the building. Marcus grabbed the activation device from the floor and pressed it into Jake's palm. "They'll kill all of you to get to me in that bike. The technology I built into it, if they reverse engineer it." He shook his head. "It would make every dirty bomb look like a firecracker." Jake stared at the device in his hand. "What are you asking me to do?" "Ride," Marcus said simply. "Ride like hell, and don't look back." The lights went out, and the garage plunged into darkness. The garage fell silent, except for the rhythmic tick of cooling metal. Marcus wheeled himself back from the knucklehead, his weathered hands still trembling from the revelation that had just poured out of him. Jake stood frozen, processing the impossible truth that the broken-down old man before him was once the most feared saboteur in the IRA's arsenal. "You're telling me," Jake said slowly, "that you built bombs that could level city blocks, and now you can't even get up a curb without help?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "The body fails, son. The mind remembers every wire, every calculation, every face of the people He trailed off, staring at his useless legs. "This bike, though, it's not just broken. Someone sabotaged it. Professional work." Diesel moved closer to the motorcycle, his massive frame casting shadows across the engine. "Who'd want to mess with Tank's ride? That crazy bastard's got enemies, sure, but nobody's stupid enough to touch his bike." Someone is, Marcus said, pointing to a barely visible scratch on the engine casing. See that mark? It's a signature. European technique. Whoever did this wanted the bike to fail catastrophically at high speed, but they also wanted credit for the work. Jake felt ice in his veins. You're saying someone tried to kill Tank? Tank was never the target. Marcus's eyes were sharp now, the confusion and frailty replaced by the calculating mind of his former self. This bike has history. The previous owner, the modifications, the routes it's traveled, someone's been tracking it. They wanted it to surface, and Tank was just the bait. The garage door suddenly rattled as a black SUV pulled up outside. Through the grimy windows, Jake could see two men in expensive suits getting out. They moved with the predatory grace of professionals, and neither looked like they were here for an oil change. Back door, Jake whispered urgently. Now. But Marcus was already wheeling himself toward the knucklehead. No running. We finish this first. Are you insane? Those guys look like... government. Yeah, I know. Marcus's hands flew over the engine with surprising speed. 30 years I've been hiding, and now they've found me because of this damn bike. But if we don't fix what's been sabotaged, innocent people are going to die. The front door chimed as the men entered. Jake grabbed a wrench, his heart hammering, while Diesel positioned himself between the newcomers and Marcus. The old man continued working, his fingers dancing through the engine components with surgical precision. Gentlemen, the taller man said, his accent crisp and British, we're looking for someone. An old friend who's been rather difficult to locate. Garage is closed, Diesel growled. The second man, stockier with dead eyes, pulled back his jacket just enough to reveal a shoulder holster. We're not here for automotive services. Marcus didn't look up from the engine. Hello, Collins. Still playing dress-up, I see. The British man's composure cracked slightly. Seamus O'Brien. Or should I say Marcus? Clever name change, though we've suspected for years. What gave me away? Marcus asked, still working. Jake watched in fascination as the old man's hands moved with mechanical precision, rewiring connections and adjusting components. The bike's modification signature. Every engineer has a fingerprint in their work. We've been waiting decades for you to surface long enough to leave traces. Collins stepped closer. You've caused considerable inconvenience over the years. Good. Marcus finally looked up, his face hard. You killed my family. My real family, all for a cause that died with the peace accords. The cause never dies, Seamus. It just evolves. Diesel shifted his weight, ready to charge, but the second man's hand moved to his weapon. Jake calculated distances, knowing they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Then the knucklehead roared to life. The sound was magnificent, a deep, throaty rumble that seemed to shake the very foundation of the garage. But more importantly, it was unexpected. In the split second that everyone turned toward the noise, Marcus grabbed something from his toolkit. Thermite charge, he announced calmly. Old habits. I always carry insurance. The small device in his hand looked innocuous, but Collins and his partner immediately backed away. Jake had no idea what thermite was, but their reaction told him everything. Now, Marcus continued, you're going to walk out that door and forget you found me. Because if anything happens to these boys, if any harm comes to anyone in this town, I'll remember exactly who I used to be. Collins's face was white. You wouldn't. You're not that man anymore. Marcus's smile was arctic. I fixed the bike, didn't I? Muscle memory is a powerful thing. Care to test how much else I remember about making things disappear? The two men backed toward the door. Collins paused at the threshold. This isn't over. It never is, Marcus replied. But today, it's enough. The smell of motor oil and tension hung thick in Marcus's garage as dawn broke through grimy windows. Elena paced near the workbench while Marcus sat hunched over his laptop, fingers flying across keys with surprising speed for someone who supposedly spent decades as a simple mechanic. The Kozlov brothers don't make idle threats, Elena said, her voice tight. When they say 24 hours, they mean it. Marcus didn't look up from the screen. I'm aware of their reputation. Are you? Because right now they think some old man in a wheelchair is playing games with them. She stopped pacing and faced him. They have no idea who you really are. Good. Let's keep it that way. Tank's Harley dominated the center of the garage, its engine components spread across multiple tables, like the organs of some mechanical beast. The modifications Marcus had discovered went deeper than anyone imagined. The bike wasn't just carrying drugs. It was a mobile communication hub, equipped with encrypted satellite uplinks and frequency scramblers that could coordinate operations across 3 states. The Russians had been using motorcycle clubs as unwitting couriers for months, Marcus said, pulling up shipping manifests on his screen. They embed the hardware so deep into custom engines that even experienced mechanics miss it. But this bike, he gestured toward the Harley, this one's special. It's not just carrying messages, it's the master node. Elena leaned over his shoulder to study the data. Meaning what? Meaning, whoever controls this bike can intercept every communication in their network. Bank transfers, shipping schedules, safe house locations, everything. A chill ran down Elena's spine, and Tank has no idea. None of them do. The angels think they're just moving merchandise. They don't realize they're carrying the keys to the kingdom. The garage door's security alarm chimed softly. Marcus glanced at the monitor showing the street outside. A black sedan had parked across from the shop, its occupants making no effort to hide their surveillance. They're getting impatient, Elena observed. Marcus powered down the laptop and wheeled closer to the motorcycle. Then we'd better give them what they want. You're actually going to fix it? I'm going to make them think I fixed it. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision as he began reassembling engine components. Pass me that compression tool. Elena watched him work, mesmerized by the transformation. Gone was the shuffling, uncertain old man who'd first examined the bike. In his place sat someone whose every movement spoke of deep expertise and dangerous confidence. How long were you with the NSA? She asked quietly. Marcus paused, a wrench suspended in midair. Long enough to learn that information is the most valuable commodity in the world, and the most dangerous. Is that why you disappeared? Why you've been hiding here? I didn't disappear. He resumed working, his voice growing distant. I was burned, set up by someone I trusted, left to take the fall for an operation that went sideways. The official story is that Marcus Webb died in a car accident in Prague 15 years ago. Elena felt the pieces clicking into place. But you survived. Barely. Spent 18 months in a Russian hospital, another 2 years learning to walk again. By the time I made it back to the States, my old life was gone. Everyone I'd worked with either thought I was dead or wanted me that way. The sound of approaching motorcycles rumbled through the morning air. Marcus's hands never slowed, but Elena saw his jaw tighten. Tank's back, she said, checking the monitors. With friends. Marcus gestured toward another screen showing 3 additional Harleys pulling up outside. Elena, listen carefully. When this goes bad, and it will go bad, I need you to get word to Agent Sarah Chen at the FBI field office downtown. Tell her Marcus Webb is alive, and the Kozlov network is bigger than they know. When what goes bad, what are you planning? Marcus lifted a small device from his toolkit, something that definitely hadn't come from any ordinary mechanics collection. The Russians think they're so clever, hiding their operation inside motorcycle engines, but they made one mistake, which is, they assumed the old man fixing their bike was just an old man. The garage door rattled as someone pounded on it from outside. Tank's voice boomed through the metal. Time's up, Marcus! Better have good news! Elena's pulse quickened. What do you want me to do? Marcus attached the device to a specific junction in the bike's electrical system, his movements quick and sure. When I give the signal, hit the main power breaker for the building. Everything needs to go dark for exactly 30 seconds. And then we find out if I still remember how to disappear. The pounding on the door grew more insistent. Through the windows, Elena could see more vehicles arriving. Not just motorcycles now, but the black sedans she'd learned to associate with the Kozlov organization. Marcus engaged the final connection and nodded grimly. Game time. The warehouse felt different in the pre-dawn darkness, shadows stretching like accusatory fingers across the concrete floor. Marcus sat hunched over the Harley's engine, his weathered hands working by the light of a single work lamp that cast harsh angles across his face. The bike was nearly complete now, its chrome gleaming despite the poor lighting, but each turn of his wrench felt like sealing his own fate. 3 days had passed since Snake's visit, 3 days of restless sleep and constant vigilance. Every sound outside made his muscles tense. Every footstep in the alley beyond the loading dock sent his heart racing. He'd lived with fear before. 20 years ago it had been his constant companion. But he'd forgotten how it gnawed at you from the inside, how it made even the simplest tasks feel monumental. The warehouse door creaked open, and Marcus's hand instinctively moved toward the toolbox where he'd hidden the pistol. But it was only Jake, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee and wearing an expression that spoke of sleepless nights. "Thought you might need this," Jake said, setting 1 cup on the workbench. His eyes moved over the motorcycle with something approaching awe. "Jesus, Marcus, it's beautiful." It was. The engine hummed with mechanical perfection, every component precisely calibrated, every system optimized beyond factory specifications. This wasn't just a motorcycle anymore. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a testament to skills Marcus had spent 2 decades trying to forget. "She's almost ready," Marcus said quietly, accepting the coffee with grateful hands. The warmth felt good against his perpetually cold fingers. Another day, maybe 2. Jake pulled up a crate and sat down heavily. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual easy demeanor had been replaced by a tension that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of soldiers before a battle. "Tommy's getting antsy. He's been calling every few hours, wanting updates, and there's something else." Marcus looked up from the engine. "What?" "There's been talk around town. Nothing specific, just people asking questions about you, about the shop. Sandra mentioned that 2 guys came by yesterday, clean-cut types in expensive suits. Said they were insurance investigators, but something felt off." The coffee turned bitter in Marcus's mouth. Insurance investigators. Right. He'd used similar cover stories himself once upon a time. What did Sandra tell them? Nothing useful, she hopes. But Marcus... Jake leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Who the hell are these people, and what do they want with a broken-down motorcycle?" For a moment, Marcus considered telling him everything, the whole sordid truth about David Kellerman, about the projects that had cost him his leg and his soul, about the enemies who would never stop hunting him. But looking at Jake's earnest face, he couldn't bring himself to destroy the young man's world with the weight of his sins. "Some mistakes follow you forever," was all he said. Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with uncomfortable intensity. Finally, he spoke again. "Sandra knows, doesn't she? That's why she's been so protective of you all these years. That's why she gave you the job, let you live in the apartment upstairs without asking questions about your past." Marcus's hands stilled on the wrench. He'd always wondered how much Sandra had guessed, how much she'd simply chosen not to see. Sandra's a good woman who believes in second chances, and third chances, and fourth. Jake's voice carried no judgment, only a quiet understanding that made Marcus's chest tight. "Look, I don't know what you did before, and I don't care. You've been good to me, taught me more about engines than I learned in trade school, but whatever's coming, you don't have to face it alone." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of motorcycle engines rumbled through the walls, multiple bikes moving slowly, deliberately. Jake jumped to his feet, but Marcus remained seated, his face resigned. "They're early," he murmured, watching the warehouse's windows flicker with the sweep of headlights. The engines cut out, leaving an ominous silence. Footsteps approached the door. Heavy boots, at least 4 sets. Marcus stood slowly, his artificial leg protesting after hours of sitting, and moved to face the entrance. The door opened without ceremony, and Tommy Castellano walked in flanked by 3 other angels, all wearing their colors, all radiating the kind of controlled menace that came naturally to men who'd made violence their profession. But Tommy's eyes weren't on his escort. They were fixed on the motorcycle with an expression of genuine reverence. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed, approaching the bike like a pilgrim visiting a shrine. "She's gorgeous." Marcus said nothing, watching as Tommy circled the Harley, taking in every detail. The club president's weathered face showed none of the suspicion from their previous meeting, only the wonder of a man seeing his most prized possession not just restored, but transformed into something transcendent. "When can she ride?" Tommy asked without looking away from the bike. "Tomorrow," Marcus replied. "Maybe tonight, if you're in a hurry." Tommy's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, I'm in a hurry, old man. We all are." The warehouse fell silent, except for the steady drip of oil from beneath the panhead. Marcus wheeled himself closer to the workbench, his weathered hands trembling as he reached for the encrypted drive Tommy had pulled from the bike's hidden compartment. The small device felt impossibly heavy in his palm. "You know what this is, don't you?" Rico's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The Hells Angels president stepped from the shadows, his leather boots echoing against the concrete floor. Behind him, 3 more bikers emerged, their faces grim. Marcus closed his eyes, decades of carefully constructed lies crumbling around him. "I was hoping I'd never see one of these again." Jake moved protectively closer to his grandfather's wheelchair. "What the hell is going on here?" "Your grandfather," Rico said, lighting a cigarette with deliberate slowness, "isn't just some retired mechanic. Are you Marcus?" The name dripped with contempt. "Or should I call you by your real name, Dr. Marcus Kellerman, former weapons engineer for the Kozlov crime family?" The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared down at the old man he thought he knew, searching for truth in the lined face that had read him bedtime stories and taught him to change oil. "Grandpa," Marcus's voice barely rose above a whisper, "I never wanted you to find out this way." Tommy yanked the drive from Marcus's hands, his face flushed with excitement. "This is it, isn't it? The location of the Kozlov weapons cache. 15 years the FBI has been looking for those stolen military-grade explosives. And 15 years I've been running from what I helped create," Marcus said, his shoulders sagging. "I designed the security systems for Viktor Kozlov's operations. When I realized what he was planning, selling weapons to terrorists, starting wars for profit, I tried to get out. But you don't just walk away from the Kozlovs." Rico flicked his cigarette into a puddle of motor oil, watching it hiss and die. "So you stole their most valuable asset list and disappeared, changed your name, faked a disability, hid in plain sight. Very clever." "The disability isn't fake," Marcus snapped, steel returning to his voice. "Kozlov's men made sure of that when they caught up with me in Detroit. Left me for dead in an alley, but not before Victor's enforcer put 2 bullets in my spine." Jake's mind reeled, trying to reconcile this revelation with the gentle man who had raised him after his parents died. "Why didn't you destroy the drive? Why keep it all these years?" "Insurance," Marcus admitted. "I knew if they ever found me, it was the only thing that might keep me alive long enough to—" The warehouse's main door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Black SUVs screeched to a halt outside as tactical lights blazed through the opening. Federal agents poured in, weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed off the metal walls. "FBI! Everyone on the ground! Now!" But even as the agents secured the perimeter, another sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive rumble of high-performance motorcycles approaching fast. Rico's hand moved to the gun beneath his vest. "That's not good," he muttered. "Kozlov's people. They must have been tracking the bike all along." Agent Sarah Chen stepped forward, her badge gleaming under the harsh lights. "Dr. Kellerman, you're under federal protection now. We've been monitoring Kozlov communications. They know you're here." The motorcycle engines grew louder, circling the warehouse like mechanical vultures. Marcus gripped his wheelchair's armrests, his knuckles white. "You don't understand. Victor doesn't just want the drive back. He wants me to pay for betraying him, and he'll kill everyone here to send that message." Jake helped his grandfather secure the drive in a hidden pocket of his jacket. Whatever Marcus had done in the past, whatever secrets he'd kept, Jake wasn't about to abandon him now. "What's on that drive that's worth all this?" "Locations of weapon caches across 6 states, Marcus explained quickly. "Military explosives, chemical components, enough firepower to level city blocks. I encrypted it all before I ran, but given enough time and resources." A sniper's bullet shattered the window above them, sending glass cascading down like deadly rain. The FBI agents immediately returned fire as dark figures moved between the parked cars outside. Rico grabbed a shotgun from behind the workbench. "Chen, how many men you got?" 12 agents, but if Kozlov brought his full crew... "We're outnumbered." Rico pumped the shotgun with practiced efficiency. "But we've got defensible positions and they have to come to us." Marcus wheeled himself toward the panhead, its chrome gleaming despite the chaos erupting around them. "There might be another way. The bike's communication system. If I can patch into it, I might be able to contact someone who can help." Another volley of gunfire erupted outside. Jake ducked low, protecting his grandfather as Marcus's fingers flew over the motorcycle's hidden control panel. Whatever happened next, Jake realized their quiet life in the garage was over forever. The past had finally caught up with them, and the only way forward was through the storm of violence that Victor Kozlov had brought to their door. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and fear. Jake's hands trembled as he worked on the Harley's engine, his weathered fingers moving with practiced precision despite the chaos erupting around them. Outside, the rumble of approaching motorcycles grew louder, mixing with the distant wail of sirens. "How much longer?" Danny demanded, pacing behind him like a caged animal. The biker's leather jacket was torn from their earlier escape, and dried blood crusted his knuckles. "These things take time," Jake muttered, not looking up from the carburetor. But time was exactly what they didn't have. Through the grimy windows, he could see headlights sweeping across the industrial district like predatory eyes. Sarah crouched by the radio scanner they'd grabbed from the shop, her face pale in the green glow of the display. "FBI's got units on Riverside Avenue, local PD's blocking the interstate on-ramps." She looked up at Jake, her expression a mixture of fear and accusation. "This is because of you, isn't it? Because of who you really are." Jake's wrench slipped, barking his knuckles against the engine block. The pain was nothing compared to the weight of 30 years' worth of buried secrets now clawing their way to the surface. "I told you, that life is behind me." "Bullshit." Danny grabbed Jake's shoulder, spinning him around. "My brothers are dying out there because of whatever you did." "Start talking, old man." Before Jake could respond, the warehouse's main door exploded inward. 3 figures in tactical gear swept through the opening, red laser dots dancing across the concrete floor. But these weren't federal agents. Jake recognized the efficient military precision of private contractors. "Down! Everyone down!" The lead operative's voice was muffled behind his mask, but Jake's blood turned to ice. He knew that cadence, that slight Eastern European accent. "Dmitri," Jake whispered. The operative froze, then slowly reached up to remove his tactical mask. A scarred face emerged, one side twisted by old burn marks. Cold blue eyes fixed on Jake with the intensity of a man who'd waited decades for this moment. "Hello, Professor." Dmitri's smile was winter sharp. "You look older." Sarah and Danny exchanged confused glances, but Jake's focus narrowed to the weapon in Dmitri's hands. "I destroyed the prototypes, all of them." "Not all." Dmitri gestured to one of his men, who produced a tablet displaying technical schematics. "Your motorcycle friend's little restoration project has been quite illuminating. Amazing what secrets old machines can hold." Jake's heart hammered as he saw the familiar diagrams on the screen, his own engineering work from 3 decades ago. The Harley hadn't just been modified for performance, someone had hidden classified defense technology inside its frame, technology that Jake had helped develop before he'd learned what it would be used for. The guidance systems you designed, Dmitri continued, they're worth 50 million to the right buyers. The Chinese are particularly interested in outdated American missile technology, easier to reverse engineer, you understand. You son of a bitch! Jake lunged forward, but one of the other operatives stepped between them, rifle raised. Now, Professor, you're going to help us extract the components, just like old times. Go to hell. Dimitri's expression hardened. He pulled out a smartphone, showing Jake a surveillance photo of his small apartment building. Mrs. Chen from 2 Billions was watering her flowers this morning. Sweet old lady. It would be unfortunate if our cleanup crew made an error in apartment numbers. The threat hit Jake like a physical blow. He thought of his elderly neighbor who brought him soup when his arthritis flared up, who never asked questions about his past. The weight of his wheelchair seemed to double, anchoring him to 30 years of carefully constructed normalcy that was crumbling around him. Jake, don't, Sarah said quietly. Whatever this is, we can find another way. But Jake was already moving, his hands returning to the Harley's engine with grim purpose. Only now he wasn't trying to fix the bike. He was carefully accessing the hidden compartment he'd noticed during his earlier work. His fingers found the concealed panel, feeling for the failsafe he prayed was still functional. Smart choice, Dmitri said, moving closer to watch. Jake's thumb found the pressure switch, a tiny mechanism disguised as a bolt head. He'd installed it himself decades ago when the Cold War still raged and he'd believed he was serving his country. Now he understood it might be the only thing standing between a dangerous technology and the wrong hands. There's something you should know about my work, Jake said, still focused on the engine. I never trusted anyone, not even my own government. Dmitri frowned. What are you? Jake pressed the switch. Deep within the Harley's frame, thermite charges that had waited 30 years finally ignited. The explosion wasn't large, but it was precise, turning delicate electronic components into slag in milliseconds. The warehouse filled with acrid smoke as alarms began wailing throughout the industrial complex. In the chaos that followed, Jake had one clear thought: the real fight was just beginning. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Victor's men stormed through the entrance, automatic weapons spitting fire into the darkness. Marcus rolled behind a workbench, pulling Sarah down beside him as bullets shattered tools and sparked off metal surfaces. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with motor oil filled the air. "We need to get to the bike," Marcus shouted over the deafening gunfire, his weathered hands surprisingly steady as he checked the pistol Jake had pressed into them moments before the assault began. Jake crouched behind a support beam 30 feet away, his own weapon trained on the advancing figures. "The back exit's blocked," he called out, firing 3 quick shots that sent one of Victor's men diving for cover behind an overturned table. Sarah's laptop bag was slung across her shoulder, containing the encrypted files that had started this nightmare, the same files that proved her father's missile guidance system had been stolen, not sold, the same files that Victor would kill anyone to possess. A thunderous crash echoed through the warehouse as something heavy struck the rear wall, more of Victor's people trying to breach their escape route. Marcus counted at least 6 shooters from the front entrance, probably 3 more coming from behind. The math wasn't favorable. "The motorcycle," Marcus said, his voice carrying decades of tactical experience. "It's our only way out." The restored Harley sat in the center of the warehouse like a mechanical altar, its chrome gleaming despite the muzzle flashes strobing around it. Getting to it meant crossing 40 feet of open ground while under fire from multiple angles. Jake's eyes met Marcus's across the chaos. Understanding passed between them, the kind of wordless communication that develops between men who've faced death before. Jake nodded once, then began laying down, suppressing fire toward the front entrance. Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand. "When I move, you move. Stay low, stay close." They burst from cover as Jake's shots forced Victor's men to duck. Marcus's limp was barely noticeable as adrenaline overrode decades of accumulated pain. Sarah stayed tight behind him, her heart hammering against her ribs as bullets whined past them. A new voice cut through the gunfire, Victor himself, shouting orders in Russian from somewhere near the entrance. Marcus recognized the tone of a military commander, someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. This wasn't going to end with negotiation. They reached the motorcycle just as the rear wall exploded inward. 3 black-clad figures poured through the breach, sweeping the warehouse with tactical precision. Marcus dove behind the Harley, using its bulk as cover while he fumbled for the keys. "The files," Victor's voice rang out, now speaking accented English. "Bring me Dr. Chen and the files, and perhaps the others live." Sarah's grip tightened on her laptop bag. "He's lying," she whispered. "I know," Marcus replied, inserting the key with practiced calm despite the bullets fragmenting the concrete around them. Men like Victor don't leave witnesses. The engine roared to life with a deep, powerful rumble that seemed to shake the entire building. Marcus had rebuilt this machine to perfection, every component calibrated for maximum performance. Now their lives depended on his craftsmanship. Jake appeared beside them, blood streaming from a graze across his forehead. "They're closing in from both sides. We've got maybe 30 seconds before they flank us completely." Marcus swung his leg over the bike, wincing as his damaged hip protested. Sarah climbed on behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. There was only one way out, straight through Victor's position at the front entrance. "Jake, the loading bay doors." Marcus pointed toward the chain-operated mechanism near the main entrance. "Can you get them open?" Jake followed his gaze and understood immediately. The bay doors faced the street, their only chance of escape, but opening them meant crossing directly into enemy fire. "Give me covering fire in 10 seconds, Jake said, checking his remaining ammunition. He had perhaps 6 shots left. Marcus revved the engine, feeling the raw power thrumming between his legs. This was what the motorcycle had been built for, not weekend rides through scenic countryside, but survival, escape, the difference between life and death measured in horsepower and courage. Victor's men were advancing more boldly now, sensing their quarry was trapped. Muzzle flashes came from multiple positions as they coordinated their assault. In moments, they would have clear shots from every angle. Marcus engaged the clutch and shifted into first gear. The Harley lurched forward as Jake made his desperate sprint toward the loading bay controls. Bullets sparked off the motorcycle's frame as Marcus accelerated toward the front entrance. Sarah pressed tight against his back. The loading bay doors began their slow upward crawl, just as Victor appeared in the warehouse entrance, his weapon trained directly at them. His face was a mask of cold fury, the expression of a man watching his carefully laid plans disintegrate. Time seemed to slow as Marcus opened the throttle completely and aimed straight for the narrow gap between the rising doors and the concrete threshold. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Marcus limped through the shadows, his cane tapping against concrete that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Rust flakes drifted from the ceiling beams like snow, and somewhere in the distance, water dripped with metronomic persistence. He'd chosen this place carefully, isolated, forgotten, perfect for what needed to happen. Behind him, Jake's boots echoed heavily. The Hell's Angel had insisted on coming, despite Marcus's protests. The kid didn't understand what they were walking into, couldn't comprehend the machinery that had been set in motion the moment Marcus had touched that bike. "You sure about this?" Jake whispered, his voice carrying further than intended in the cavernous space. Marcus paused, listening. Somewhere above them, metal groaned against metal. Could be the building settling. Could be something else entirely. "I'm not sure about anything anymore," Marcus replied, then continued forward. The bike sat in the center of the warehouse, like a mechanical altar, its chrome surfaces catching what little light filtered through the grimy windows. Marcus had moved it here 3 days ago, knowing that keeping it at the shop would sign everyone's death warrant. The machine purred softly in the silence, that impossible engine humming with technologies that shouldn't exist. But they weren't alone. Viktor Kozlov stepped from behind a support pillar, his presence somehow both expected and shocking. The years had been kinder to him than to Marcus. No wheelchair, no damaged spine, just silver hair and eyes like winter ice. He wore an expensive suit that looked absurd in the decrepit surroundings. "Hello, Mikhail," Viktor said, using the name Marcus had abandoned decades ago. "I wondered when you'd surface again." Jake's hand moved toward the pistol tucked in his jacket, but Marcus raised his cane slightly, a warning. Any sudden movement would end badly for all of them. "Viktor," Marcus kept his voice level. "Still playing puppet master, I see. Someone has to maintain order." Viktor's accent had faded over the years, but traces remained, sharp consonants that cut through the air. "You disappeared so completely. New identity, new life, even managed to damage yourself convincingly. Very thorough. The wheelchair had been real enough. 3 years of paralysis after the car accident that had provided perfect cover for his escape. The recovery had been unexpected, a medical miracle that gave him back his legs but left him forever changed. Weaker, vulnerable, the project should have died with the others, Marcus said. Projects like ours never die. They evolve. Viktor gestured toward the bike. Though, I admit, seeing our work powering something so pedestrian was unexpected. When did you become sentimental about motorcycles? Jake shifted beside him, confusion radiating from the younger man. Marcus had told him fragments of the truth, but how do you explain 30 years of buried secrets? How do you describe the weapons they'd built, the technologies they'd developed, the people who died when everything went wrong? It was supposed to be theoretical, Marcus said, memories flooding back despite his efforts to suppress them. Clean energy, they said, revolutionary power systems for a better world. Viktor laughed, the sound echoing off concrete walls. You always were naive, Mikhail. Did you really believe the military wanted better power sources for humanitarian purposes? The bike's engine note changed slightly, responding to something none of them could see. Marcus felt the familiar chill of recognition. The quantum resonance chamber was still active, still drawing power from sources that violated 6 laws of physics. In the wrong hands, the technology could level city blocks. I fixed one bike, Marcus said. That doesn't mean... Oh, but it does. Viktor reached into his jacket slowly, producing not a weapon but a tablet device. The screen showed satellite imagery, thermal readings, energy signatures that painted the warehouse in false colors. The moment you activated that engine, every government agency with the right equipment took notice. The Chinese are already mobilizing. The Russians never stopped looking. And the Americans... He shrugged eloquently. Jake stepped forward, his patience finally exhausted. What the hell are you people talking about? It's a bike engine, not a nuclear weapon, isn't it? Viktor's smile was razor-thin. Tell him, Mikhail. Tell him what that beautiful machine really is. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decades pressing down. When he'd first seen Jake's bike, something in him had stirred, not just mechanical expertise, but pride. The old pride of creation, of building something that pushed boundaries. He'd told himself it was harmless, just helping a kid with his ride. But you couldn't take apart the past. You couldn't separate the man from his sins. The engine, Marcus said quietly, is a weapons system, the most efficient one ever built, and I just taught it how to sing again. Outside vehicles were arriving, multiple engines, coordinated movement. Viktor checked his watch with theatrical precision. And now, he said, everyone wants to hear the song. The warehouse echoed with the sound of steel on concrete as Marcus wheeled himself between the scattered motorcycle parts, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he surveyed the devastation. 3 days had passed since Kozlov's men had torn through his sanctuary, and the legendary Harley lay in pieces across the oil-stained floor like the bones of some ancient beast. They knew exactly what to look for, he muttered, picking up a mangled piece of the bike's custom exhaust system. The chrome was scratched beyond repair, but more concerning were the precise cuts in the metal. Whoever had done this understood the machine's unique modifications. Jake crouched beside a pile of twisted cables, his face grim. "Can you rebuild it?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. His fingers traced the damaged components, reading them like a doctor examining X-rays. The engine block was intact, as was the frame, but the delicate network of sensors and processors that made this bike more than just a motorcycle had been systematically destroyed. "The question isn't whether I can rebuild it," Marcus finally said. "It's whether we have time before Kozlov realizes what he's really looking for." Sarah emerged from behind an overturned workbench, dust covering her leather jacket, found something they missed. She held up a small, innocuous-looking device no bigger than a thumb drive. It was wedged behind the fuel tank mount. Marcus's eyes widened as he recognized the component, the neural interface backup. Christ, I forgot I'd hidden that there. He took the device with shaking hands. "This changes everything." "What does it do?" Jake asked, though something in Marcus's expression suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "It's a complete copy of the bike's learning algorithm. Every route it's ever traveled, every conversation it's recorded, every face its cameras have captured over the past 15 years. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. "Including the night Elena was killed." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Sarah sank onto a nearby crate, the weight of understanding settling over her features. "You mean this thing has evidence of who really killed her?" Marcus nodded slowly. The bike was parked outside the safe house that night. Its sensors were always recording, always learning, if someone went in or out, if there were voices, if there was violence. He paused, staring at the small device. It would have captured everything. Jake stood abruptly, pacing toward the warehouse's grimy windows. "So, why haven't you looked at it before now?" "Because I was afraid," Marcus admitted. "Afraid of what I might find, afraid that the truth might be worse than not knowing." He slipped the device into his shirt pocket, but mostly because accessing this data requires the bike to be fully operational. The neural interface only works when it's integrated with the complete system. A sound from outside made them all freeze, the low rumble of multiple motorcycles approaching. Sarah drew her pistol, while Jake grabbed a tire iron from the scattered tools. Marcus wheeled himself toward a bank of monitors he'd managed to keep hidden from Kozlov's search. "3 bikes," he said, watching the security feeds. "But they're not Russians." His voice carried a mixture of relief and apprehension. "It's Tommy Chen and 2 of his lieutenants." The warehouse door slid open with a metallic screech, and Tommy Chen stepped inside, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the industrial surroundings. Behind him, 2 massive bikers flanked the entrance, their hands resting on concealed weapons. "Marcus," Tommy said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You look like hell." "I've had better weeks," Marcus replied, not moving from his position near the monitors. "What brings the head of the Jade Dragons to my humble workshop?" Tommy's smile was thin and calculating. "Word travels fast in our circles. A certain Russian businessman has been asking very specific questions about you and that bike of yours. Questions that suggest he knows more about your past than is healthy for any of us." "Kozlov's reach extends further than I thought," Marcus said carefully. "Oh, it's not just his reach we're concerned about." Tommy approached the scattered motorcycle parts, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. "It's what he's promising to share with federal law enforcement about certain historical arrangements between my organization and yours." Sarah kept her weapon ready but lowered. "What kind of arrangements?" Tommy's gaze shifted to her, then back to Marcus. "The kind that kept a lot of dangerous people out of prison for a very long time. The kind that relied on information networks and early warning systems that someone with Marcus's particular talents might have facilitated." Marcus felt the weight of the backup device in his pocket, and now Kozlov thinks he can use that history as leverage. "Precisely, which is why we need that bike operational again." Tommy's voice hardened. "Because whatever secrets it's carrying, they need to disappear before they can be used against any of us." The old engineer looked around at the scattered pieces of his life's work, then at the faces surrounding him, allies and enemies blurred together by circumstance and desperation. The truth was within reach now, but claiming it meant risking everything he'd built in the 15 years since Elena's death. "Give me 72 hours," he said finally, "but I'll need parts, specialized components that won't be easy to find." Tommy Chen smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "Money is no object. Just give me a list." The warehouse erupted in chaos as Marcus Volkov's men poured through the entrance, automatic weapons blazing. Tommy dove behind his Harley, bullets sparking off the concrete floor around him. The old man's wheelchair spun as he maneuvered behind a workbench with surprising agility, his weathered hands already reaching for something underneath. "There's nowhere to run, Petrov," Volkov's voice boomed across the space. 30 years I've been hunting you, and now you're trapped like the rat you are." Jake felt his blood turn to ice. Petrov. The name hit him like a sledgehammer. His grandfather wasn't just some mysterious engineer, he was Dmitry Petrov, the Soviet defector whose stolen submarine designs had shifted the balance of the Cold War. The man the Russians had never stopped hunting. "Grandpa!" Jake shouted, but the old man was already moving with purpose that defied his age and disability. "The bike, Jacob," Dmitry called back, pulling what looked like a modified assault rifle from beneath his workbench. "Start the bike now!" Tommy was already moving, throwing his leg over the Harley. The engine roared to life. It sounded different now, deeper, more powerful than any motorcycle Jake had ever heard. The modifications his grandfather had made weren't just repairs. They were something far more significant. Muzzle flashes lit the warehouse like deadly fireworks. Sarah pressed herself against a steel support beam, her reporter's instincts warring with pure terror. She'd come looking for a story about an old mechanic and stumbled into an international conspiracy that had been simmering for decades. Dmitry's rifle barked in controlled bursts, each shot precisely placed. Despite his age, the man moved like a trained operative, using his wheelchair as both shield and mobile platform. Jake watched in amazement as his grandfather picked off Volkov's men with clinical efficiency. "The schematics," Volkov screamed over the gunfire. "I know they're hidden in that machine. My government wants what you stole." "Your government fell 30 years ago," Dmitry shouted back, reloading with practiced speed. "This is about your greed now, nothing more." Jake understood with sudden clarity. The motorcycle hadn't just broken down randomly, it had been targeted. Somehow, Volkov had discovered that Dmitry had hidden his most dangerous secrets inside the bike's custom components. The breakdown had been sabotage, designed to force the old man into the open. A flashbang grenade rolled across the floor, and Jake's world exploded in white light and ringing silence. Through the disorientation, he felt hands grabbing him, dragging him toward the center of the warehouse. His vision slowly cleared to reveal Volkov's scarred face inches from his own. "Call off your grandfather, boy, or I'll paint these walls with your blood." Dmitry had stopped firing. The warehouse fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the Harley's modified engine and the old man's labored breathing. Jake could see his grandfather calculating angles, distances, possibilities. "Let the boy go, Marcus," Dmitry said, his voice carrying an authority that cut through the tension. "This is between us." "Is it?" Volkov pressed his pistol against Jake's temple. "You cost me everything, my career, my standing, my future. Do you know what it's like to live as a ghost for 30 years? "Better than most," Dmitry replied coldly. Tommy revved the Harley, and Jake noticed something strange. The bike's engine wasn't just loud, it was emitting some kind of electronic interference. His phone screen flickered, and he saw the same effect on the tactical equipment Volkov's men carried. "The electromagnetic pulse," Sarah whispered from her hiding spot, understanding dawning in her voice. "That's why you modified the engine." Dmitry's eyes met his grandson's across the warehouse. In that moment, Jake saw not just love, but a silent apology for the secrets, the lies, the danger he'd brought into their lives. He also saw determination. "The activation sequence is your birthday, Jakob," Dmitry called out. "Remember that." Before anyone could react, the old man triggered something on his wheelchair. The warehouse filled with blinding light as every electrical system overloaded simultaneously. In the chaos that followed, Jake broke free from Volkov's grip and sprinted toward the motorcycle. "Go, go, go!" Tommy shouted, and Jake leaped onto the bike behind him. The Harley shot forward like a rocket, its modified engine providing acceleration that defied physics. Behind them, Dimitri's rifle resumed its deadly chatter, covering their escape. Jake looked back to see his grandfather fighting with the skill of a man half his age, wheelchair spinning as he engaged multiple targets. The warehouse door exploded outward as Tommy gunned the bike into the night. Jake's last image was of muzzle flashes and his grandfather's silhouette, still fighting, still protecting them with everything he had left. The modified Harley carried them into the darkness, bearing secrets that had shaped decades of international conflict. Jake gripped Tommy's jacket, his grandfather's final words echoing in his mind, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Victor's men stormed through the entrance, their automatic weapons cutting through the air with deadly precision. Marcus dove behind the Harley, his weathered hands gripping the wrench like a weapon as bullets shattered the workbench where he'd been standing moments before. "Get down!" Jake roared, tackling Sarah behind a stack of oil drums as glass exploded overhead. The Hell's Angels scattered, drawing their own weapons, but they were outgunned and outnumbered. Victor strode through the smoke, his pale eyes scanning the destruction until they locked onto Marcus crouched behind the motorcycle. 25 years old, friend. Did you really think you could disappear forever?" Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as memories flooded back, laboratory explosions, screaming colleagues, the taste of betrayal bitter in his mouth. He'd been Dr. Marcus Volkov then, Victor's partner in weapons development, before conscience had driven him to destroy their research and fake his own death. "The bike," Marcus whispered to Jake, who had crawled closer under cover of the gunfire. "It's not just any motorcycle, the engine. I built it as a prototype. The electromagnetic pulse system I developed is integrated into the motor." Jake's eyes widened in horror. That's why they want it back. Not just want, need. Without the bike, they can't reverse engineer the technology. Marcus's gnarled fingers worked frantically at the engine housing. "I can modify it, turn it into a weapon, but I need time." Sarah appeared at his shoulder, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "How much time?" 5 minutes. Maybe less. "You've got it," she said grimly, signaling to her brothers. "Razor, Diesel, buy us some time." The Angels unleashed everything they had, their combined firepower forcing Victor's men to take cover behind overturned tables and concrete pillars. The warehouse became a war zone, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireworks. Marcus's hands moved with surprising speed and precision, years of muscle memory taking over as he rewired circuits and rerouted power conduits. His disability seemed to vanish as adrenaline and desperate purpose drove him forward. The electromagnetic pulse system hummed to life, its distinctive whine barely audible over the gunfire. "Marcus," Victor's voice cut through the chaos, "you cannot run again. My employers have invested too much to let you slip away this time." A grenade rolled across the floor, and Jake kicked it away just before it exploded, the blast wave knocking them all backward. Marcus's ears rang as he struggled to focus on the delicate wiring in his hands. "Almost there," he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Just need to calibrate the frequency modulation." Victor appeared around the edge of a support beam, his pistol trained on Sarah's head. "Enough! Step away from the motorcycle, Doctor, or the girl dies." Marcus's hands stilled. Sarah met his eyes, shaking her head slightly, but he could see the fear there. Around them, the gunfire had stopped, both sides locked in a deadly standoff. "You always were sentimental," Victor said, his accent thickening with emotion. "It's what made you weak then, and it will kill you now." "Maybe," Marcus said quietly, his fingers making one final adjustment to the bike's electronics. "But it's also what makes me human." He pressed the starter button. The Harley's engine roared to life with an otherworldly sound, the electromagnetic pulse system charging with increasing intensity. Victor's eyes widened as he recognized the telltale whine of the technology they'd developed together decades ago. "You magnificent bastard," Victor breathed. "You turned it into a bomb." "Not a bomb," Marcus said, struggling to his feet with Jake's help. "Something better. An electromagnetic pulse that will fry every piece of electronic equipment in a 3-block radius. Your weapons, your communications, your escape vehicles, all useless." Victor's hand tightened on his pistol. "Then we all die here together." "Not all of us." Marcus pulled a small device from his pocket, a remote detonator jury-rigged from spare parts. "This warehouse is shielded. We'll survive. Your men outside won't be so lucky when their vehicles stop working and the police arrive." The sound of sirens was already growing louder in the distance. Victor's face contorted with rage, but before he could pull the trigger, Razor emerged from the shadows behind him, a massive wrench connecting with the back of his skull. The Russian crumpled to the ground, his weapons skittering across the concrete. "Now!" Marcus shouted, pressing the detonator. The Harley screamed as the electromagnetic pulse erupted outward in an invisible wave of destruction. Through the broken windows, they could see cars stopping dead in the streets, streetlights flickering out, and Victor's backup team stumbling from their disabled vehicles in confusion. Marcus collapsed against the workbench, his strength finally giving out as the weight of 25 years of running crashed down on him. But for the first time since he'd faked his death and disappeared into obscurity, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The abandoned warehouse echoed with the distant rumble of approaching motorcycles, their engines growing louder by the second. Samuel Chen gripped his cane tighter, his weathered hands steady despite the tremor of anticipation running through his body. Across the oil-stained concrete floor, Jake Martinez checked his weapon one final time while Maria positioned herself behind a stack of rusted shipping containers. "How many?" Jake whispered, his voice barely audible over the mechanical symphony outside. Samuel closed his eyes, listening with the trained ear of a man who had spent decades identifying engine signatures. 8 bikes, maybe 9. They're riding hard, angry. He opened his eyes, meeting Jake's gaze. Victor Kozlov doesn't make mistakes twice. He knows exactly what he's walking into. The engines cut off abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence that felt heavier than the noise had been. Samuel could hear his own heartbeat, steady and strong despite his age. 40 years of running, of hiding behind the facade of a broken-down mechanic, had led to this moment. The prototype motorcycle, his life's work and his greatest sin, sat silent in the center of the warehouse, like a metallic altar waiting for sacrifice. Heavy boots crunched on gravel outside. Voices carried through the thin walls, speaking in rapid Russian. Samuel's lips curved into a grim smile. He understood every word, though he hadn't spoken the language aloud in decades. "They're surrounding the building," he murmured to Jake. 3 at the front entrance, 2 at the back, the rest taking positions at the loading docks. "How do you—" Jake started, then shook his head. "Never mind. What's the play?" Samuel looked at the motorcycle, its chrome catching the sparse light filtering through dirty windows. The bike that had started this entire nightmare, the machine that contained technology decades ahead of its time, technology that had already killed too many people. His greatest achievement and his deepest regret rolled into one beautiful, terrible creation. "The play is simple," Samuel said, limping toward the bike. "I finish what I started 30 years ago." The front doors exploded inward with a shower of splinters and dust. Victor Kozlov stepped through the wreckage, flanked by 2 massive men carrying assault rifles. His face bore fresh bandages from their last encounter, and his eyes burned with cold fury. "Samuel Chen," Victor called out, his accent thicker than Samuel remembered. "The ghost who refuses to die." Samuel stood beside his creation, one hand resting on the fuel tank. "Victor, you look terrible. Prison wasn't kind to you. 20 years, old man. 20 years I rotted because of you." Victor's men spread out, their weapons trained on the shadows where Jake and Maria hid. "But I never forgot. I never stopped planning. And now you're here for the bike, Samuel said. Still the same greedy fool you always were. Victor's laugh was harsh, echoing off the warehouse walls. Greedy? Do you know what this machine is worth? What it could do in the right hands? The engine alone could revolutionize everything. Military applications, aerospace, weapons systems. And you've been hiding it like a broken toy. Because some things shouldn't exist, Samuel replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades of guilt. We learned that lesson once before, remember? Budapest, 1994. How many people died because of our arrogance? That was different. This time we can control it. Samuel's finger found the small switch hidden beneath the fuel cap. Control. That's what we told ourselves last time. He thought of the young engineer he'd once been, brilliant and naive, believing that innovation alone could change the world. He thought of Maria's father, Jake's Brotherhood, all the innocent people caught in the crossfire of his past mistakes. Step away from the bike, old man. No, Samuel said quietly. I won't let you repeat our mistakes. Victor raised his weapon, the barrel aimed directly at Samuel's chest. Then you'll die for nothing. I'll take the bike anyway. Samuel smiled, thinking of his daughter thousands of miles away, living a safe life under a different name. She would never know the whole truth about her father, but perhaps that was for the best. Some legacies were better left buried. You can take the bike, Samuel said, pressing the hidden switch. But you can't take what makes it special. A soft clicking sound emerged from within the motorcycle's engine. Victor's eyes widened as he recognized the noise, the same sound Samuel's devices had made all those years ago in Budapest, right before the world exploded around them. What did you do? Samuel's voice was calm, almost peaceful. I made sure it can never hurt anyone again. The clicking grew faster, more insistent. Victor lunged forward, desperation replacing fury on his scarred face. But Samuel stood his ground, guardian and destroyer both, ready to face the consequences of choices made decades too late. The timer reached 0. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Marcus Volkov's men poured through the entrance, automatic weapons blazing. Walter threw himself behind the massive Harley, his arthritic hands surprisingly steady as he reached for the pistol Jake had pressed into them moments before. "Stay down!" Jake shouted, returning fire from behind a steel workbench. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Bull and his angels had taken positions throughout the garage, their own weapons answering the assault with practiced precision. But they were outnumbered 3-1, and Volkov's mercenaries were advancing methodically through the maze of motorcycles and equipment. Walter's mind raced as bullets whined overhead. The prototype blueprints, the real reason Volkov had come, were still locked in his safe. But the Russian wasn't here just for old grudges anymore. Walter had seen the hunger in those cold eyes, the recognition of what those designs could mean in the wrong hands. "The back exit!" Bull called out, blood streaming from a graze on his forehead. "We need to get Walter out of here." But Walter wasn't moving. Despite the chaos, despite the very real chance he might die in the next few minutes, he couldn't leave. Not yet. His gnarled fingers found the motorcycle's ignition, and the engine roared to life with a sound like thunder. "What the hell are you doing, old man?" Jake ducked as another spray of bullets shattered the windows above them. "Something I should have done 30 years ago," Walter replied, his voice carrying a calm certainty that cut through the noise of battle. He'd spotted Volkov near the entrance, directing his men with cold efficiency. The Russian had aged too, his black hair now silver, but those predatory eyes were unchanged. When their gazes met across the smoke-filled warehouse, time seemed to slow. Volkov raised his weapon, but Walter was already moving. The legendary Harley lurched forward with devastating power, its rebuilt engine screaming as Walter aimed directly at his old nemesis. His bad leg screamed in protest as he shifted gears, but adrenaline and decades of suppressed fury drove him forward. Volkov dove aside at the last second, the motorcycle crashing into 2 of his men instead. Walter fought to maintain control as the bike skidded across the concrete floor, sparks flying from the metal footpegs. "You always were too clever for your own good, Kozlov," Volkov snarled, using Walter's real name like a curse. He'd rolled behind a concrete pillar, his expensive suit torn and dirty. "And you were always too greedy," Walter replied, bringing the Harley around in a tight circle. The engine modifications he'd made gave the bike incredible torque and responsiveness. Every adjustment he'd obsessed over was paying off now. The firefight continued around them, but it had become something else entirely. Jake and the Angels were holding their own, their superior knowledge of the terrain giving them an edge despite being outnumbered. But this was personal, a confrontation 3 decades in the making. Volkov emerged from cover, firing rapidly. Walter felt a bullet graze his shoulder but didn't slow down. He'd lived with pain for years. This was just another kind. The motorcycle roared toward Volkov again, but this time the Russian was ready. He stepped aside at the last moment and grabbed Walter's arm, using the bike's momentum to drag the old engineer from the seat. They crashed to the ground together, the unmanned Harley sliding into a pile of steel drums with a tremendous crash. Despite his age and disability, Walter fought with desperate strength. But Volkov was younger, stronger, and had murder in his eyes. They grappled on the concrete floor as bullets flew overhead, each man seeking advantage. "Those blueprints," Volkov gasped, his hands around Walter's throat. "They're worth a fortune to the right buyers, military contractors, terrorist organizations. They'd pay millions for that technology." Walter's vision began to blur, but he managed to knee Volkov in the ribs, breaking the chokehold. "They'll die with me first," he wheezed. That's when Jake appeared, his pistol pressed against Volkov's temple. "I don't think so." The Russian froze, calculating odds. Around them, the gunfire was slowing. Bull's voice could be heard coordinating with someone. Police sirens wailed in the distance. "It's over, Marcus," Walter said, struggling to his feet. "Your men are dead or running. The cops are coming. And those blueprints? They're going to disappear forever." Volkov's eyes burned with frustrated rage, but he slowly raised his hands. "This isn't finished, Kozlov. It will never be finished." "Yes," Walter said quietly. "It is." Jake kept the gun trained on Volkov as Walter limped to his safe. With deliberate movements, he removed the blueprint folder and fed the pages into a small incinerator he used for metal shavings. The papers curled and blackened, 30 years of dangerous secrets turning to ash. When the police burst through the entrance minutes later, they found Walter sitting peacefully beside his motorcycle, finally free.